Good evening. Welcome to our second session of Racial Justice through Reimagining Policing. This special event is offered by the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice and is the second session in a series of special forums aimed to break reimagining policing into digestible bites so we can create meaningful change here in Delaware. Tonight, we will have a discussion between community representatives and impacted individuals on how policing has affected them and how we can use creative new policing methods to benefit all of us, police and civilians. I am Clara Licata, co-chair of the Legislative Advocacy Committee of the Alliance, and I will be introducing our moderators and panelists, and later we'll come back on to monitor the chat. Our wonderful Calvin Jackson is our tech wizard tonight. We are members of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and we look forward to learning with you tonight. This special forum will last for 1 hour and 30 minutes. If you'd like, before we begin, go ahead and put your name in a message to our moderators or panelists, and feel free to add where you're from, whether from Delaware or from another state, or if you're part of an agency or organization. We are so excited to have you here tonight. Now I would like to introduce our panelists for tonight. Kobe Owens, community organizer and civil rights activist who is also vice chair of the Delaware Democratic Party. Charita Calvecchi Mateko, coordinator of Delaware Civil Rights Coalition. Lakeisha Nix. Ms. Nix is the sister of Lamont Moses, killed in an altercation with police in January. Ms. Nix is a former residential service manager for group homes and is now an entrepreneur. Bruce Wright. Mr. Wright is the Community Development Program Manager of First State Community Action Agency. We are also honored to have two representatives with us tonight, Representative Eric Morrison and Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker. Mr. Morrison represents the 27th District, and Ms. Dorsey Walker represents the 3rd District. At this point, I'm going to hand things over to our moderators, Dr. Jim Nolan and Gail Jackson. Dr. Nolan is a former Wilmington police officer and an expert on reimagining policing. Mr. Nolan is chair of the Sociology Department at West Virginia University and has extensively researched and written on this topic of what real effective change in reimagining policing can look like. Gail Jackson is a mental health professional and advocate for communities and impacted individuals. And now I turn it over to Jim and Gail.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Clara, for that introduction. I thank you all for being here, and I thank you for your openness to being a part of this webinar tonight. I am Gail Jackson, and I'm a retired mental health clinician and addictions counselor. Since retiring, I've had the opportunity to work with the Alliance on many different projects, and one in particular is the Legislative and Advocacy Committee. And tonight, because I personally believe that the current system with policing is flawed, I'm looking forward to us having some robust conversation and just coming up with some ideas as to how we can make effective change. So I look forward to the conversation. I look forward to moderating and getting the feedback as we try to develop a blueprint for going forward. And Jim, I pass the mic to you.
Let me prepare my screen here. Okay. Thank you, Gail and Clara, and thank you to all the members of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice for all you do to make these types of events continue. I also want to thank the panelists for agreeing to participate tonight. It's really important to hear from you on this important topic, and we're thrilled to have you here. As you heard, this is our second forum on the topic of racial justice through reimagining policing. The first was on July 20th. It's available on YouTube at the links we provided. We don't want to repeat our presentation, so we're making them available to anyone interested in the topic. So I've been asked to provide a few words that may help frame the discussion tonight. Soon we'll hear from activists, organizers, community members, and elected representatives, all who interact with the police regularly and want to make things better. When I was a Wilmington police officer, I thought about crime and criminality this way. Criminals commit crimes and the police arrest them. It's this simple. Repeat offenders should get heavier fines for more incarceration. I thought it was a good thing to lock people up and to turn them into informants so I could arrest more people. In places where lots of crime occurred, such as in project areas and poor Black and brown neighborhoods in the city, it was obvious to the police that many criminals live there. If the police harm someone in the process of an arrest, the officers should be protected. This is because the police are the thin blue line between order and chaos and must use force as needed to hold that line. Now, this is the police mindset. This was my mindset. Doing the right thing meant going out every day and making lockups. The more the better, the more times you stop cars, the more times you stop people and check them out, the more likely you were to find criminals, to interrupt crimes in progress, or to find illegal drugs or guns. These are the behaviors in policing that are most likely to win awards and help officers to gain status in the department. You see, it's not just promotions that police officers want, but to be recognized as a good cop. Beginning around 1990, I was a full-time police officer in Wilmington. I was also a full-time graduate student at Temple, working on a PhD. This is where I was first introduced to the new way of thinking about crime and social control that's influenced the way I've studied policing for the past 2 decades. I want to mention 2 points here that I believe are important to our discussion tonight about reimagining the police. The first point is that the police mindset I described above, originates in the field, not the officer. I often explain this by comparing the field of policing to a sporting event like football. In football, the player's behavior aligns with the logic of the game. Things like excessive injuries don't really matter. Players are rewarded for making hard hits, which are considered good plays, even though they cause serious harm. When problems arise, such as public outcry over high rates of concussions or other physical injuries, the game itself never comes under scrutiny. The blame is put on bad apple players or equipment or something else. So now in the NFL and the NCAA, they've implemented new penalties, rules for kickoffs, cameras catching every infraction in slow-mo, and players are ejected many times during games. But guess what? This has had little impact on injuries because most injuries in football are because of good plays, not bad ones. This is analogous to the law enforcement game being played on the field of policing. Its logic and mindset result in racial disparities and harms to many communities. And it's not the fault of a few bad cops deviating from policy. Rather, it's the good cops following policy, following the rules, and being rewarded for following the rules that create this situation. The second point I want to make before we open the discussion is about the social context and its relationship to crime and violence. And one way I demonstrate this to my graduate students at WVU is I walk into the classroom on the first day of class and I say nothing. It feels like this. You know, at first it's funny, and people begin to look at the clock, look at their phones, giggling and that sort of thing. But after a little while, it becomes very frustrating. People become agitated. And before the end of the class, particularly a 3-hour class, it's infuriating. Every time I've done this, students have begged me to stop. Some people begin to cry and say, please don't do this any longer. I've had students come up to me and threaten to hit me and to walk out of the room for not teaching and to report me. So I have to ask them before they storm out, please come to the next session so I can say more about this. And when they do come back, I point out that the way they were feeling and they wanted to act or they did act during the exercise was related to the context and not their character. But if criminologists were on campus that day and they were looking for the worst students and the worst classrooms, and they were going room to room and they were counting bad behavior and counting the infractions, they would definitely identify my room as having the worst people in it. And so the same is true in communities. There are a lot of communities, the context actually gives rise to behaviors that, you know, and feelings that lead to crime and violence. And can you imagine if we reimagined a police agency aimed at changing the context rather than just catching criminals? So in this era of reform, we want to take time to reimagine the police if it's aimed at creating safe, strong places, aimed at the context rather than people. This is really what Ms. Nix talked about at our last meeting. I know she's here today and she's going to say more about this, but I recommend going to the session, the tape of the last session, and listen to what she has to say. I think it's really important as we go on. But what Gail and I are going to do is we're hoping to make this conversational. I had to say a couple things just to get things rolling, but we hope this is somewhat conversational. There's no real time limits on your discussion. Nobody has like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but these are the types of questions that we want you to think about and respond to. But also, if you have your own questions, don't be limited by these. So these are like, what has been your experience with the police in Delaware? When you hear the term reimagining policing, what comes to mind? And what are the biggest challenges? Is it possible to overcome these, and how? So I'm going to stop presenting, and I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to start. And Gail and I will facilitate the best we can to make sure everybody's heard.
Absolutely. So who wants to start, or anyone? First of all, I would ask the question, is there any comments or feedback on what Jim just presented? Particularly if you weren't at the first session or didn't have an opportunity to see the tape from the first webinar. Any thoughts, particularly with the example of the students in the context of policing from that format?
So I guess I'll jump in. I have a comparison.
Thank you.
Just because I work in low-income communities throughout the state of Delaware, and Jim's analogy to the students is an exact parallel to a community that's been ignored by society. And the only press, the only positive press a number of these communities get is when something negative happens. And it reminds me of my own childhood when I look at the residents, especially the young people in these communities. We talk about their image of police and the anger that young people have. Well, they don't have any positive connections to law enforcement. The only time they see officers is when they come into their community and they take someone away, or they're responding to an existing negative situation. So I think that's a great comparison. That's a great example of how people get frustrated. And that's what we really end up dealing with in a lot of communities. Now, I would say on a positive note for law enforcement, I just left an event tonight that had about 20 police officers at it, National Night Out. They're playing with kids. They're giving positive information. They're trying to recruit and educate young people. So, I mean, there's the give and take, but you got to spend time to make an effort to get into the communities that we ignore.
And Mr. Wright, what I would just follow up with on that, and I hope that I'm not going off script too much, but I think that experience that you just had is the bottom line. You know, that's community policing, and unfortunately enough of that doesn't get done. And I think that's why when people see police in certain communities, they're uncomfortable because they haven't seen enough of those opportunities.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. But the other part of community policing is having officers build that relationship and then go into the community and sit down and have real conversation with residents about how do we solve the problems, and let them play a part in solving the problems, because there are good people, extremely good people in these communities that have long-term legacies there. Their children have been raised there, and children have stayed there and still contribute to those communities. They want to see a change, but they don't know how.
And I was gonna jump in if I can, because I actually think the event you're referring, was that in Glasgow?
No, the one it's actually going on right now in Georgetown.
Oh, okay, because there's one coming up here in Glasgow that I know I have a prior commitment, but I was just gonna say, I think the important thing though too, and things like that are important, but in my mind, it's one thing to come out and have a night, once in a while and play with the kids and that kind of thing, but it's another thing to be out there every day in the communities, out of your cars, walking the streets, talking to neighbors, helping people. So I think some people see, like an event like that as kind of like a one-off thing, and they're very jaded or suspicious about it because they see it as a one-off event where maybe, there's trying to be an impression made. And I think they, to your points, it would be much more useful for them to be out there every day and holding events with adults and everyone and talking about community policing and what the issues are.
Mr. Morrison, I would just ask a follow-up question. Do you think it's possible with that the trust is so broken in many communities that it's hard to even for the police, if they were to be out there, that has to be a consistent, like Mr. Wright was saying, that has to be a consistent undertaking because the trust issue is such a major piece, or the lack of trust in a lot of communities.
Yeah.
I told a story about my own experiences as an older Black woman and just my discomfort. And, I don't feel like I should still be having that discomfort at this late stage of the game. So my hope is going forward that future generations can be more comfortable because these alliances and these communications and commitments to each other are built. Because one of the things I didn't say in the beginning is I think the current system is flawed because aggressive behavior and fear don't work. And I think that's what a lot of the reactions with police and the people in the community are.
It was really eye-opening for me, frankly, as a white man, when we were knocking doors and making calls during my campaign. We knocked on over 10,000 doors. And
you're gonna knock.
Can you mute yourself, please, if you're not? Thank you. Knocking on over 10,000 doors, and so many Black district residents I talked to had these horror stories that I just have never experienced and I never would experience. And some of them, they ranged anywhere from like one lady sitting at a stoplight and having a policeman roll up next to her and roll down his window and motion for her to roll down hers and say, "What did you do to own a car like that?" Another one, her son was at a gas station and he had just started driving, and two officers came up and surrounded him and were harassing him to the point where he called his mother and said, "I'm afraid they're going to kill me." Then you had very serious over down the street several times, has been pulled over police, and one time he even had guns pulled on him and he was convinced he was going to be killed. And he's just kind of trying to tell them, like, "Look, I'm a teacher," and this and that, and they didn't even believe that he was a teacher. So it was all very eye-opening to me because obviously although I'm part of a minority community, I'm not a person of color, and those experiences are completely foreign to me.
Any other thoughts or feedback on this? And I guess it kind of goes into the question that we had. What has been your experience with police in Delaware? Yeah. I mean, we can continue that and take that conversation to the next piece.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear Representative Morrison make those comments because it is a terrifying experience. When you're pulled over and you're afraid of what to do, how to motion and how to respond, and it's more terrifying for communities with less means.
Anybody else with some thoughts or feedback? We'd love to hear from everybody. Just get the ball rolling.
What I would like to see to put my perspective as a Latina out there in answering the first question about the experiences of my Latino community. So by the sign or default, the police in one way or the other cooperates with immigration in a community that mostly is undocumented. And that is deadly, changed their lives forever. I was called to find a person who had disappeared from Tuesday to Thursday, and they were not, I was calling everyone, nobody will find him in the list of people that were detained. He was detained. So I don't know how that worked. They did their very best to find it. They did not. And he was released at 6:45 a.m. Guess who was outside in the parking lot? The ICE. And they took it from there, and here he went, never returned to his 4 children. Their lives shattered forever. Those are one of the things that where there is no police cooperation, but they are in some way by default. Those things are happening. Why at that time? Why in that place? Why was he didn't have a right to call his lawyer or somebody in the family that would have called the lawyer? It happens that this guy got that very week his social security number, his permit to work that he have been begging for years. That's how ironic those situations could happen. And then, I know of other families, very humble families, the father is accused of something, and, in the middle of the night, a squad, heavily arms, break into the doors and terrifying forever these children that are innocent, regardless whether the father did it or didn't do it. Is that experience that we want to expose our children? And of course, it's not only to Latino families. And then, there is technical interpretations of the law. So if you are drunk, even if you are not driving, but you are in a car or close to a car, even if it is in a parking lot, it's DUI. It's DUI. You were driving under the influence. Technically, that's how they interpret. Okay, so I guess the crime is always with an intention, but that's how things are extended in the interpretation with terrible consequences. And sometimes I think, will it be better to have more Hispanic police? You know what? I have seen beautiful son of a friend of mine, Latinos. And he was telling me, oh no, I was trained. He was new, recently, fresh from the school. If I kill somebody, but I've saved my life or the life of others. So it's this indoctrination that a life, as long as can be expended in as long as you save yours or somebody else's. So when you go with that mindset, but we can talk about a lot of things, but one that also caught me as a Latina, as a woman Latina, is how is this feminist perspective of justice going to be heard? We have worked so much, and then we have been co-opted. All the money goes to create data, like they don't believe that we're being, abused, killed, and then it goes to the law enforcement. Okay, so those are kind of the realities I want to put out there. But the most important thing for me that I can say is that if we continue using this framework of punishment, we will continue be round and round and round. You cannot fix that, because punishment at the core of our system wreaks havoc with every human experience. Even those that want to recognize and have some responsibility, they will say, no, innocent. To see the game that is played in the course of law. And 95% will get, they won't have a trial, they will have a plea bargain. What type of justice are we talking about? Why? Because there is punishment in the core. And we need to reinvent how we can do it. And other countries in the world have done it with the help of indigenous people like the Maori people in New Zealand, and creating a system, they call it family system, actually it's recognized as restorative justice system. And things have gone for the better. Colorado has a very, very wide application, even though it's also co-opted because it's in the system, but the idea is there. How can we respond to crime and conflict from a perspective of peace. Can we imagine that? We may think that it's impossible, but no, this is our nature. Our nature is to be peaceful human beings. And the other framework is how if we reinvent a system that satisfies human needs of all. Because within us, we have trauma and resilience. We are made of trauma and resilience in different degrees, in different aspects and ways. That's the human being we are talking about, that we're creating a social construct for. So we might as well satisfy the needs to belong, the needs to have meaning, the needs of autonomy, the need of have wisdom and be able to heal. I can talk more about those details. I don't want to take more of my time.
I wonder if I can respond, and before we go, I do want to get over to Kobe too. He's been sitting here for a little bit, wants to weigh in. But one of the things that if you someday historians will look at this period of time, and they'll see in all aspects of history and philosophy, and in secondary school, in the education system, punishment is a tool. There's an understanding that punishment actually works. Nobody ever questions whether punishment works. They just assume this is so. And so when we talk about like reimagining policing, if we're reimagining policing to change the context, punishment is not so important, because our goal is not necessarily to change an individual's behavior through punishment or treatment or anything. It's by changing the context. So I do appreciate very much that perspective. And I hope we continue along those lines.
Hey,
Mr. Owens, did you want to add anything, please, sir?
Yeah, just adding on to that, I think one thing we need to do is, take a step back and look at the point we're at right now, right? How did we get to this point where we have legislation that deals with police brutality, not just in Delaware, but across this nation? And I look at it as the protesters who took to the street in 2020 for racial justice, for police reform. The Black Lives Matter movement turned the nation's attention of the brutal deaths of Black citizens, of people like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement, and called for reallocation of funds or defunding the police. And that kind of became a rallying cry for activists. But then also you had policy experts also speak up about reimagining our community safety and proposed ideas on how to redistribute the resources from law enforcement to social services. And I think that's what we really need to focus in on. This push that we've seen that's gotten traction in 2020 and 2021, it's not new. Regardless of what era we're looking at, whether it's slavery, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, minorities, especially Black Americans, have been challenged by law enforcement, and they have had to fight for equal rights. In recent decades, police departments have grown extremely powerful, whether it's the unions that are behind them having the legislative push and the electoral push on elected officials. They're backed by racist policies from the Nixon era, where you're talking about the war on drugs, or you're talking about the '94 crime bill. And then they've gained military-style, military-grade weapons. And you take all that and you take the current climate we're in right now in 2020, 2021, you give people smartphones and social media, and now the general community can see exactly what those interactions with those police who benefited from policies and weaponry over the years, what it's doing to our community. Never in a million years did I think I would watch a man on live Facebook get killed by the Philadelphia police in Walker Wallace's case last year. But it's not just that. We have our own cases right here in Delaware. You look at the Jeremy McDowell case, you look at the Lamont Moses case, you look at cases up and down this state. Is it a pattern or is it a practice of policing here? The ongoing protests, and they're still going because they're still calling for justice right now. The main ask among organizers was, what is the tangible action that we want? Transforming the system requires ongoing work of individuals and organizations on the ground, including the efforts of the people who are on this call right now. We have a great mix of experts, activists, and legislators on this call. And I think those who dedicate their life and careers to racial equity and police accountability, they understand that this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take us building on that together. And I really think from the points I heard from Charito and Eric and Bruce, I think we're on the right track, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that feedback. And, you know, I just for me personally, I would say, you know, it's a mountain to climb, but it's very doable. But I think when I think about reimagining policing, I think you really have to focus on breaking down that wall. You know, when I think Jim talks about it, has mentioned in the past about it's not about a bad apple. No, it isn't. It's the whole system. And I think that when you know that there are folks who are doing things inappropriate and not to speak on it and not to be held, not to, you know, when you continue to co-sign other people's mess, I think that continues to be a part of the problem that we have, because it's all a big network of co-signing other people's BS. And so things don't change because there's a game for those to not speak up.
And if I can, if I can just
Go ahead, Representative.
I'm sorry, thank you. To piggyback off what Gail said and what Kobe said, a couple of things. You know, it's interesting. Not long after I got into office, I had a meeting with a number of police chiefs, and one of them was making the argument to me that this is a bad apple situation. And he literally said to me, he said, you know, you have bad apples in any job. And I said, first of all, this is not a bad apple situation. This is a systemic situation, and it's been going on for decades and decades. He even tried to tell me that, hey, this all started with Rodney King. And I was like, oh, no. This goes much further back. But something I said to him, I said, and even if you want to make the bad apple argument, let me tell you something. If I've got a bad apple down at my local grocery store bagging groceries, a bad apple employee, you know, he might put my fabric softener in with my broccoli, you know, and my broccoli tastes kind of like fabric softener. When you've got a bad apple who's a law enforcement officer, they can murder someone. So there's a big difference there. Something I noticed too, when I specifically remember, because I was very vocal when I was campaigning about my desire for law enforcement reform. And I remember, I think every law enforcement officer I spoke to, or at least everyone who identified themselves. One of them, we discussed, he couldn't get around the cannabis legalization thing, and we had a really good discussion about that. One of them was a little lukewarm. One of them, it was really kind of frightening. He was very defensive and kept his hand on his gun the entire time, because I happened to be catching him at home on his lunch break. And it kind of showed me that, you know, how so often they are trained, you know, to that anyone coming to them is a threat. I mean, I'm here knocking on your door with a mask on, and it's 95 degrees in August in a campaign t-shirt, and you feel like you've got to keep your gun on your hand on your gun. But anyway, the other three officers I specifically remember, and they told me, they said, I am voting for you because we need people like you. We need major police reform. We see this every day. We know what's going on. He said, but we can't speak up about it. He said, we face so many repercussions if we speak up about it, and we want to, but we can't. So we're depending on people like you to do something about it. And that was just so telling to me that the culture is so embedded that we can't even speak about this. We will lose our jobs. We will be, all the different things that, the repercussions that they fear facing. That was unbelievable to me, that even the ones who do support the police reform and see the need for it. And two of these were white officers, and they see it. And they didn't even feel that they could come out about it.
Okay. Any other feedback, Ms. Nix? I know you have had a lot of interactions and had some. We really appreciated your feedback at the last town hall. And I don't know if you heard everything that was just said, but if you had anything you wanted to add to this, that would be great. As we move on, I guess, to the second question, what does reimagining policing look like? Well, what does it look like when you think about that?
Yes, I would love to chime in. Thank you. When I think about reimagining policing, I think about a standard of high morale. I'm listening to everyone speak about it being a systemic thing, and that being very well true. I think we also have to look at the individual people as well. I spoke with you all about this before. I come from a background of human services and direct care work. And in my human services field, I work with people who are, just coming out of jail and, have a history of violence and things of that nature. But I'm trained to, be people first, people centered. And that's the standard that police need to have too. There's no way me as the average worker, not having the trainings that police have, not having weapons that police have, I'm able to decipher and de-escalate situations, even when I'm dealing with someone who's temperamental and has a history of, when they are being temperamental, they act out by hauling off and hitting someone. And in those situations, I have to kind of deal with it. I can't hit that person back. I can't, I think police have to come to understanding when they're coming into inner city communities where a lot of these murders are happening, this police brutality is happening. They have to understand that they're dealing with a vulnerable community who's on the other side of the systematic issues that causes them a lot of trauma, a lot of poor conditions, low finances, things of that nature. I grew up in the inner city of Wilmington, and I see how these police officers show up in these communities. You know what I mean? They never really get out of their cars unless there's an issue. I never see them really engaging. There's some that's in that, the ones that do engage is few and far between. And they get better results with the people as well. Now I live in Old Newcastle. These officers really get out, talk to the people. They grew up with some of the people. When I first moved here, my neighbor told me about a story about one of the people who grew up here actually fighting the officer, and they still handle him with care. Yet you have people like my brother trying to get away from officers, and he gets killed. Jeremy McDowell in a wheelchair and gets shot by someone who's not even using their service weapon. So as much as it's systemic, it's also people who have low morale, no compassion for the people that they're supposed to be protecting and serving, and knowing that they have protections that keep them comfortable in, coming into these communities and committing these crimes and knowing that they're going to get away with it. Something has to change. I think it's not as hard as we're making it seem. The people have already spoken and said what they want. It's just a matter of our legislators listening to the people and not keeping the cops comfortable and doing what needs to be done here in Delaware. And that's really repeal Leah Board. I'm not even for amendments, because where you have amendments, you have opportunity for loopholes. It actually needs to be repealed. And that's really all I have to say on that matter.
Well, thank you very much for sharing.
Yes.
You know, and when you say that, Ms. Nix, and to my ear, it sounds like it shouldn't be that complicated, but it is so complicated because, again, I think there's all these people with their hands in a dirty pie. I call it a dirty pie, and they don't want to take their hands out of the dirty pie for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I mean, it takes a collective action without a doubt, and I think that people have to be open to owning what's theirs and taking ownership for what's right and what's wrong. And I think, you know, everybody puts it on someone else. The things that are happening, people getting murdered and so forth, those things, I always thought you're innocent until proven guilty. But unfortunately, that's not a lot of the mentality when some people are accosted by police. I mean, and when you talk about, a lot of people take offense to it and they become very angry, but that is the reality of many people. You know, a 5-year-old kid in some neighborhoods will see the cops very differently from the 5-year-old in another community, just based on their experiences within that community.
That's true. That's true.
Can
I'm
I,
raising a 5-year-old who looks at police different because of what happened to my brother.
Right.
So you know, I'm facing that reality now.
yeah, can I interject just a little?
Yes, sir. Yes,
I,
Mr.
Yeah, I started off with something, and I don't feel like I took it all the way to the end. And I'd like to kind of rewind a little bit because personally, I've worked with the police for the 27 years I've been at First State. And I agree with everything that everyone said. Police, you know, reimagining police is important and it's needed. But I feel like in the state of Delaware, we have some great examples that just don't catch on. They're not put forward. They're not, we don't grab a hold of it and make that the model. And I mentioned last night when I first saw Jim, I met him when we were starting the Strong Communities Initiative. And at the very first meeting, and I'll quote her because she allows me to say what I feel, Bernice Edwards made the statement in front of everyone, cabinet secretaries, other elected officials, our then executive director, when everything's over and there are going to be 2 organizations that are going to be in the community, and it's going to be community action and it's going to be the police. And, you know, fortunately, we're still here and we're still funded, but police officers, law enforcement are always going to be there. And if we don't grab on to the models of the things that work and promote them, then we're going to be lost. The Strong Communities Initiative, bringing police officers into the community. At one point, we had a mobile policing unit that sat in the community, brought children onto the van, allowed them to engage the police officers, as I said, in a positive setting. To this day, we don't have a mobile unit, but I do work with officers, and I have to say it's the community policing officer and it's usually the captain that are allowed and afforded the opportunity to do that. But they come out and they engage with the residents. Now, the only issue with this is it doesn't saturate the whole force. It's not something that every officer, every trooper has the experience to do, is to interact with the community. And I hear what everyone's saying. It was one of the first things we asked for was step out of your car, talk to the residents. I think we're on the right track, and I don't think we can let it go, but I think we have to look at the models that do work. I keep seeing in the Q&A, we have a Captain Alice Brumley. She's an example of a law enforcement officer that we could learn from. You know, the DSP could learn from. She's about to retire, unfortunately. Mary McGuire at Troop 7 in Rehoboth is another captain that's trying to reach out to the community and do positive things. It takes both sides, but we have to lift up those officers that are willing to step out be heard and understand the issues and the concerns that we have.
Thank you, Bruce. I wonder if I could respond to you. First of all, I had such a great experience years ago doing the Strong Communities Initiative with you and with others. It was a very positive experience. But what happens in policing is that those sorts of community policing projects are ancillary to the real police work. The real work is law enforcement. And so there's occasionally, a good actors, a good apple, who will come into a community and do what they call community relations, and they see the benefit of it. Certainly they like it and they think it's the right thing to do. But generally speaking, the police, to become a good cop is to be a law enforcer. And this is not to say that some people don't need to be arrested, because if somebody breaks into your home and steals something, you want an investigative force to make sure they get them. But the idea is this: there's an assumption that the law enforcement approach keeps communities safe, and there's a lot of false assumptions there. In the same way that we say that the adversarial system in the courts gets at the truth. Nothing could be nothing could be right about that. We know that prosecutors conceal the truth and defense attorneys conceal the truth. The adversarial system doesn't necessarily get at the truth. So we have to challenge these assumptions behind some of these models. But they're difficult because we're born with them. We all were born in the era where police was law enforcement. Now's our time to reimagine. What could it be? Suppose we ask the question, instead of what law enforcement system works, what works to keep communities safe? And then reimagine policing as doing that.
Yeah, I agree with everything
Thank you very
said.
much. Yeah,
I
thank
do.
you. Thank you for your question. We need to think, the indigenous people in Ecuador, when I went to study with this, Charito, we need to unlearn what we learn. And that means what Mahatma Gandhi said: we need to decolonize our mind. We have normalized that the system that we have is the way things are. There cannot be more wrong. It's a social construction that started in the 11th century that took the community concept of dealing with conflict that cried underneath their feet. Why? Because the king of England at that time wanted the money that he didn't have of taxes. So now, instead of people among themselves fixing, marrying among themselves to stop the killings or giving the cows and the sheep or whatever, they have to pay then from that very moment to the king. And until they pay, they have to be in so-called jail. That's the system that we think that is normal. It came from interest, economic interest. And then when we think in what the police have been in this country, it was created to stop the people that were enslaved. So how rotten and at the root the system is because of that. Because it was created, you cannot make something nice out of something that is rooted in something so wrong. It's not normal. We human beings cannot go on thinking the same way. I'm not saying that there is no good people. Yeah, there is. I can give you that. But we are going to be wondering forever if we don't understand that is not the way how we should deal. This is not normal. This is not a given. This was a social construct created by interest, economic interest. But you know what? The beautiful thing is, if we can even imagine how wonderful it will be, and if we will pay people within the criminal justice system, they will replicate the matter, because when you are paid to do something nice or bad, that's what they do. And I'm going to put 4 things that are the basis of restorative justice. So, okay, the first one, center in those that have been harmed. Okay, what a difference. Imagine what it will be in society, wellness centers, counseling, your careers, whatever, instead of prison jails, and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what we have done, 80 billion that we spend of our taxes. in maintaining a system that only furthers the income of the prison industrial complex. This is what we have done, and it's huge and it's bad. Nice. Another beautiful thing. How about if there is a system that says, if you're ready to tell the truth, we are here for you, and we'll start the dialogue, and then we will come up to a place where the person who was harmed will tell you what they need to heal, and eventually we'll start to make things right out of our wrongs. What a difference. Wouldn't that be beautiful? And then another element, the community. Instead of you being barred or no, you don't belong here, you have to get out of the court or whatever. Why, if we care, if we have something to contribute, to be part of this community process where actual people that care can come and support the person who was harmed and the person who harmed others. And I'm not talking about, face-to-face meeting. I'm not talking even to have these people together this is not what restorative justice does. What they do is we give a community for the person who was harmed and another community for the person who harmed, and see what happened with those meetings week to week to week to week. Yes, it takes a lifetime to change the trauma that is the one that the production of acting in, derivated in committing a crime. And then the last thing, can we imagine that instead of having laws and regulations in a prescriptive process, we can create a dialogue based on our human values, moral, ethical, spiritual values that we agree upon, and we said this will be our guide, and let's just grow based on those things. What a beautiful work. Guess what? It's happening in New Zealand. It's happening in many parts of the world. Restorative justice has been almost for more than 40 years now in the experience. In when you get to see one well done, because sometimes they are co-opted with mediation or something like that. But when it's authentic, when it's very centered in what makes restorative justice, then you will never forget what you hear, what you see, and that transform your life. And guess what? The officers, police officers will be the happiest people. Less trauma for them, also for the judges. I have seen judges in South America to kill themselves because they can't cope with so much of the things that they have to put up with. We can and we should design a system that deals with conflict and crime that reflects our human needs.
Thank you. Wow. And, bottom line, what I'm hearing is humanity. Community involvement, fear doesn't work, aggressive behavior doesn't work, and basic humanity. So it's so much. So, Jim, we have some more questions, and then I see a lot of things jumping in this chat box. Yep. So any other thoughts or feedback on reimagining policing and what it looks like? And then also tying it in, I think we kind of already heard what some of the big challenges are. Anybody want to speak any more on that? What are the biggest challenges, and is it possible to overcome those challenges? So I think we're kind of hearing the challenges is the isolation of the police, and not all police, but unfortunately too many tend to isolate from basic communities, and just poor communication, a lot of that. So, I mean, that's a lot of part of the obstacles. Anybody else have any thoughts or feedback on those things before we jump into some of these questions? Because this chat box, I keep seeing all these comments. Mr. Morrison?
I was going to say, to be frank, and anybody who knows me knows I'm a pretty candid person. One of the challenges that we have is, where a lot of this, will get done is in the legislature and by law. And some of our own legislators are the challenge. You know, we did pass a couple of law enforcement reform bills this past time, but you know, we had the law enforcement committee that went on for months and months, and then came out with some recommendations. And you know, I'm not disparaging the work that a lot of folks put into that committee at all, but they came out with recommendations that we all knew were things that needed to be done. There were more things that needed to be done. The NAACP, I think it was of Wilmington or of Greater Delaware, they right long before that, they had put out a long list of recommendations. So we knew what needed to be done. And now you look, for example, at Senate Bill 149, which would ensure that prosecutors and criminal defense counsel and even the public have access to law enforcement officer misconduct records, and that it removes the confidentiality clause in LEABOR. That's supported by 68% of Delawareans. It also enables the creation and operation of effective community review boards at the state, county, and municipal levels. That's supported by 71% of Delawareans. Yet we can't get the traction for this bill to pass. And you have to ask yourself why, and you have to ask yourself who has a seat at the table. And you know, that's very discouraging to me, is that something as basic as this, as common sense as this in law enforcement reform, that we're struggling to even have something like this get traction down in Dover.
Yeah, Representative Pearson, that's exactly what I was going to say. I sat in on the Delaware Racial Justice Collaborative meetings, and there was plenty of input about civilian oversight. There was plenty of input about training and sensitivity training and other things. There was talk about enhanced background checks. Everything you just mentioned was talked about, but it did not make it to your offices. You know.
Mr. Owens, any other thoughts or feedback on this topic? I think we have about 5 to 7 minutes before we get to these chat questions. And there's a lot of.
I completely agree with what Representative Morrison just said, with there being members in the General Assembly who are holding things up because of their own personal interests with police unions and things like that. Anyone who knows me knows I don't bite my tongue. And I've been working with the NAACP as their policing chair on writing those points that Eric was talking about that we listed out that needs to change here in Delaware. Working with my attorney, Carlton Mayer, who used to work in Obama's White House. We already know what is going on in our communities. We, as Black people and minorities, know what needs to change with policing because we're dealing with what's wrong with it right now. When they delayed action and said, let's do a task force and we're going to have recommendations by January, what happened? We didn't get recommendations until almost June. Actually, most of them came out in June. And then the chair of that task force sat there and told the people, oh, well, because it came out late, we can't do nothing this year. And he slow walked everything. That was an issue a lot of us had with it. The fact is that in vote, the people who were actually on that task force, not the subcommittees, was not the public. It was overwhelmingly the police. And that's how you saw those votes go down. And that's why you see so much passion and activists right now, because one, we had faith in the legislators and they failed us. Representative Cook failed the people. He got up there 3 days after one of the largest protests in Delaware's history. He got up there and lied to the community. And now he tries to backwalk things and say, why is everyone upset with me? Because we put our trust in you. Now it's time for the General Assembly to have bold action. Am I fully on board with just amending Leah board right now? No, but I also understand the current making of our General Assembly. When we have overwhelming cops who are running our General Assembly, especially in the House with the Speaker, who's made racist comments, who called for me to be arrested myself for leading protests, that is what we're dealing with right now. So when you look at what Leah board is and what it's become, it was made in good faith here in Delaware, but then it's over the last 10, 15 years, it has been built on to a place where now it's protecting bad apples, it's protecting officers who are abusing their power, and the community is left defenseless pretty much. That is what we're trying to change. And right now, if legislators do not get it, the only way we're going to change it is having to start all over with it. And that means we're going to have to get rid of it and work on something else. And that's just where I'm at on this right now. Earlier, I talked about the defund and reallocation. I just want to clear something up. When I say defund, that does not mean abolishment of police. That means reallocation of resources. Right now, we spend billions of dollars throughout this nation on policing, while the communities, the underserved communities, are going starving. If we start fixing some of those underlying issues, which people believe that over policing will fix, we will truly start to see a change in a lower crime rate. That means investing in housing, investing in addressing food insecurities, addressing our education system. It's no reason why there should be more officers in schools than there are school counselors and mental health specialists. That is what we need to look at as how we are spending. It starts with the budget, but it's going to take everyone working together, all the key stakeholders, the officers, the community, the activists, and just overall the elected officials.
Wow.
Mr. Owens, thank you for that.
Right.
So that was a wrap and a bow. Thank you. So now we have a lot of questions. Dr. Nolan, you have any other things before we get to some of these questions?
Before we do, first of all, I want to thank everybody, but Sherry Dorsey Walker is here. I wonder if we could, before we get into the questions, if we hope she sticks around for the questions, but it'd be nice to hear from her what she's heard so far. So she's a wonderful person who's an activist in Wilmington, and I've worked with her a lot. I know she works with the police, so I'm sure she has a lot to say. Representative Walker.
Thank you so very much. It's great seeing you. I must say to my colleagues, I see that Representative Morrison is on here, and to Kobe Owens, who has been nothing but an advocate throughout this whole process. We were able to get Senate Bill 147 passed and Senate Bill 148, and those are the bills, respectively. 147 deals with use of force, and then 148, civil rights. We kind of knew that Senate Bill 149 was going to be stalled. I think Stevie Wonder could see that, and I'm not being facetious in saying that. I'm saying that because, for the reasons that some who previously spoke gave. The Senate Bill 147 and Senate Bill 148 don't get passed without having the community and the police at the table simultaneously. It can't be you're meeting with the police on one day, you're meeting with the community on another, because it's important for the community and the police to hear from one another. And that's how legislation gets passed. I'm not telling anyone how to run their bills. That's how I run mine. Hence why we were able to get House Bill 195 passed, and that's body-worn cameras. That should have been one of the easiest pieces of legislation to pass, and I shall tell you it was not. And Representative Morrison can speak to it. It was utterly ridiculous, some of the things that were happening behind the scenes, yet we still were able to get it done. And I'll encourage Sir Kobe Owens, because I think he's an amazing human being, as are all the other individuals who are on this call. You said you put your faith in the legislators. I would never do that. I put my faith in God and trust that God will speak to the hearts of the man or woman, because you are where you are right now because you trusted a man or a woman. And I'm just going to leave you with that, because it's so important that we don't put faith in man where we should be putting our faith in a higher power.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So, final thoughts before we jump to some of these questions. I think we have a good amount of time to really go through quite a few of them, right, Claire?
Yes, we do.
All right, so do you want to give us one, or?
Yep, sure.
And as we put these questions out there, anybody can jump in and respond to them. I saw a lot in the chat from who is it, Miss Alice?
Captain Bromley.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to give us some, Claire, please?
Sure. I do want to just circle back briefly to Representative Dorsey Walker and Representative Morrison, because we had a question in the chat and it's been discussed extensively about, the failure to get Leobor reform passed. Representative Dorsey Walker, you were just saying how in order to get legislation passed, you need to have the police and the community at the table at the same time. And I guess my question is, relating to that is, weren't they present at the table during the task force together for about a year, but still couldn't get it done? So what needs to be done? What are the obstacles and what needs to be done to get Leobor reform passed?
Excellent question. And I said that, and I said I'm speaking about how I pass my legislation. Whether it's dealing with adding Black history to the state's curriculum, having all the right partners at the table. I don't tell anyone else how to work their legislation. That's how I do mine. If I'm dealing with a policing issue, I have the police there, the community, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get people to agree to it. What ultimately, and again, I'm not telling anyone else how to do their legislation. That's not my legislation, Senate Bill 149. So I think it would be a good idea to have the bill sponsors answer that particular question about their bill. But I can speak to the bills that I worked with Senator Pinckney and Senator Brown to get passed, and as well as Senator Morrison, because he was a co-prime on pretty much all the legislation that we did regarding police reform. And I thank him for that.
And I'll jump in and Sherry, and I call her Sherry. I've known Sherry for years and I can't get out of the habit. So I don't mean to be disrespectful.
That's right. We're family.
I just cannot call you Representative Dorsey. Well, I just can't. You're Sherry to me. Always will be. But and thank you, Sherry, for all your work on this year. One thing I'll say, about 149, and I have not worked on that bill, so I don't mean to speak for the sponsor or anyone else, but here's kind of part of my perspective. For example, back when I had that meeting with the Police Chiefs Council, they said to me, oh, we fully support body cameras. And they said to me, actually, they said the reason we support those is because we think they'll help police, because police are often unfairly targeted and, things are said that they did, and that's not how the situation unfolded. So these will protect police. So it wasn't so, and I'm not saying that that wasn't a fight to get that through. So please don't think I'm saying that. But when you're talking about things like making public the records of police officers, when you're talking about things like community review boards, it's my understanding that the police simply don't want this. So I don't understand, to me, it's a proverbial case of the fox guarding the hen house. And even in the News Journal recently, there was an article about this, and it stated, and again, take it for what it is. It was a story written by a particular editor or writer, but it said, in order for police reform to get through, it has to be approved by the police in Delaware. And it can't be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean, to me, it's tantamount to, if you're trying to, reel in the banking industry or the healthcare industry that so often is so greedy and takes advantage of people, to say, hey, they've got to have a seat at the table too. Well, what do you think they're going to want? So when it comes to something that they're absolutely opposed to, I don't know what exactly needed to be done there. I know activists need to come in, but I just see this as in cases like this as the fox guarding the hen house.
And that's a fair assessment, Representative Morrison. And I say that because when I said it was a fight, it wasn't so much the police with House Bill 195. It was some others. But I shall say with Senate Bill 147 and 148, and working with Senator Pinckney on both of those pieces of legislation, the police, there was a lot that they did not want, but we were able to get them.
Okay. Sounds like
Did we-
we may
did we
have.
Can I
lose it?
chime in on that, please?
Yes, yes,
I'm
please, Ms.
sorry.
Nick.
I'm just
Come on,
sitting
Ms.
here.
Come on, Ms. Nick.
Okay, so
Police
of
in the
course.
community.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no problem. And working with the police in the community, we were able to get use of force. And the community's voice was magnified. And I thank each of you for speaking up and speaking out. And that's how we were able to get it passed.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Ms. Nix.
Yeah, I just want to chime in and say, I don't find it surprising that the police were okay with the body worn camera. I just seen somebody in the chat say, you know, they were okay with the body worn cameras because they know that they're doing everything right. But I think what's being confused by the police is that right to them is what's policy. But we know that the policy isn't right because the body worn camera really is just, and I believe Cheyenne Miller spoke to this, is trauma porn for people like me who watch their loved ones get murdered on there, but know that 9 times out of 10, the people who are breaking the law, because murder, you know, is a law, is against the law. The people who are behind that camera, on camera, breaking the law, have protections that will not allow them to have punishment for what they're doing. So of course they will let SB 147 get passed. Of course they'll let SB 148 get passed. But when it comes to SB 149, why would they? And they also asked in the chat, does your surgeon have their records to be seen for the world? Yes, I come from the medical field. Yes, you do. We have the state oversight in human services, state oversight in the medical field. If we do something wrong, if I get hit by one of the clients that I'm taking care of and I haul off and hit them back, my license is taken away from me. So we have oversight, and police need oversight too. They do. And that's really all I have to say about that. Like, they're comfortable in their protection. So that's why they're like, yeah, go ahead, do the cameras. Y'all can do the cameras all day because we're going to investigate ourselves. And after we're done investigating ourselves, we're going to get off. And that's just going to be the end of that. We're going to be deemed justified in whatever we do. So yeah, go ahead. You can watch your loved ones get brutalized on camera. Sure, you can. That's basically what they're saying. And it's that type of arrogance that needs to be dismantled. It really does. It does. It's that type of mindset that really needs to be dismantled. Police needs to be people first, just like the medical field, the human services field, because you're dealing with people. There's no way that you can be in the field of protecting and serving and not be trained in community interactions. That goes hand in hand. It also goes hand in hand with de-escalation. So
thank you, Ms. Nix. And I see Representative Morrison and Dr. Nolan nodding their head in total agreement with what you're saying. Can you make some quick comments on that? Because I think we got a couple more questions we want to get to, and then a final question. Either gentleman.
Go ahead, Representative Morrison.
I'll say real quick, and again, I do not want to tap down the progress that we made and the work that Sherry and Marie and others have done, because it is so important, and that body cameras bill is so important. So, you know, I want to make it very clear from a personal perspective that is so important. And I know I don't know, but I know what Sherry went through to get that bill passed. And until you're in Dover, you just don't even know. And I know how hard Sherry worked on that. And I do think this is an important thing, and it's an important step. But I hear you loud and clear that, you know, without so many other things following behind that, you know, what does it mean? And again, it makes me suspicious, quite frankly, you know, when you're talking about, you know, the police. I mean, like I said, they said to me, we support cameras because basically it's going to vindicate us. It's going to benefit us. They didn't say anything about, hey, this will keep, you know, the bad apple officers out there from doing what they or from not doing what they shouldn't be doing. You know, it was, this is here to help protect the police. So, you know, that's very disturbing to me when the mindset is the police have to approve something and the police are going to approve something when it's going to benefit the police.
And you know what, I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge Ms. Nix from the bottom of my heart. I have been praying for your family and just uplifting all of you in prayer. And just know that we're with you and we love you.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done thus far.
You're more than welcome. We'll keep fighting together.
Dr. Nolan, can you speak real quick maybe on how, I mean, that's a part of the issue, the approach to policing, you know, and that approach really is not working.
Well, from my perspective, all attempts to increase transparency and to body cameras and LEOBOR and those types of things, these are things that are necessary in the short term, but they don't necessarily amount to the type of police reform that we're talking about. Even if all these bills were passed and the police maintain the law enforcement perspective, we're still bound to, it still instills a mindset in officers that to keep communities safe is through law enforcement. And so, again, these are necessary first steps, but I felt like, and in fact, I wrote an op-ed about this in the Delaware paper, relating to LEOBOR and saying basically that this is lots of people are looking for new ways to think about policing. And you have a whole lot of people, including Black Lives Matter and Kobe Owens and all of his efforts that he's been doing, that they're standing by to help. If you would just sign on to the LEOBOR amendment, and it would be like an olive branch. Let's work together to reimagine policing in a way that doesn't focus on law enforcement so much, but focuses on building strong relationships in communities. That seems small, okay? It seems like the old community policing, but it's not the old community policing. It's a new game that everybody's doing, everybody's playing, everybody's trying to build strong places. That creates a new disposition, a new mindset in officers. That mindset is to be a good cop means to build relationships, to fix problems. And the accountability is at the local level and not, you know, in internal affairs.
Thank you, Jim. I think we're coming to a time place, so I don't know if we have time for maybe Claire.
Yeah, there's so many great comments in the chat. And in particular, the discussion with Captain Brumley has been great. I did want to, if she wouldn't mind speaking to it, she mentioned the implicit bias training that she had undergone with the state police. And I would wonder if she wanted to just speak a bit about that. Calvin, are you able to let Captain Brumley in to speak?
Yes, she's a panelist now.
Okay.
Captain Brumley, can you just give us a couple of minutes on the implicit bias training that you received?
Okay.
You're on mute, Captain.
You're muted. Thank you. Can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
Turn your volume up. Nope.
Nope, still can't hear you.
While she's setting up her volume, just want everybody to think of at least one single point that they could take away from tonight's discussion, and that's kind of our closing. Does she have volume now?
I don't know. She's not speaking now.
Okay. Should we go with that question? Or wait for her?
She's having trouble getting.
Okay, all right,
All right.
so go ahead, Claire, I'm sorry.
I was going to say at this point, I think we should go to the final question that you just posed to the panelists.
So the question being, is there a single point or a key point that you would take away from tonight's discussion? And if anybody and everybody wants to weigh in on that, that would be awesome.
I don't know if I can do a single point, but I'll try.
Yes, sir.
The one echoing sense or feeling of the group in the discussion is the mistrust issue within communities. It's something that we got to try to address. And I don't know how you build trust with an issue that's this great, but that seems to be the constant. I did want to say just one quick thing, if I could. When I was doing research for tonight, I came across a very old study that talked about disproportionate contact and arrest and conviction among minorities. So minorities make up 30% of the state of Delaware, but they make up an even smaller portion of arrest, but the incarceration rate is far greater than our minority race counterparts. The report is from 2010. So I would ask the Representative Morrison and Dorsey Walker to just look into that, find out why we don't have another report that's more current, more accurate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Let me just respond to Bruce quickly. I have a lot of data on the Delaware criminal justice system, particularly in policing, and I can send you reports of racial disparities in traffic stops, arrests, searches, and that sort of thing that are pretty current, like 2019 is most current.
Thank you. Any other takeaways, comments, last thoughts?
I think that reimagining what we will be if we will have something that resonates with everybody's human needs. It's a beautiful thing to start. And so glad that there is legislators that are reimagining with us, because they are going to be the final result of this reimagination and to put it into practice. But it's possible. We have what it takes. We have amazing imagination, and the power lays in the people, because we know what is needed, like trust. You know, I don't think you're going to get ever trust in the system working the way it is, because the numbers are overwhelmed. They were not created exactly to build trust in community, but that is a human need that needs to be satisfied. So the perspectives of indigenous people, the perspectives and the imagination of a feminist perspective of justice, and especially for the new generations, I think that is possible, and it's our inspiration. And I think that's what I take for today. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Morrison or Mr. Owens or Ms. Nix, anybody?
I'll just say, thank you for having this. And it's just, the importance cannot be overstated of people in the community becoming activists and getting out there and contacting their legislators and joining issue groups and issue campaigns and all of that. It just can. I know there was a town hall recently. It wasn't specifically about this issue, but it turned into being about this issue. And a couple of people on there were absolutely shocked that so many people were in favor of some of these police reforms. And it really shook those legislators and made them think and gave them pause. So we've got to keep that up until we get what people deserve.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Owens or Ms. Nix, any takeaways or thoughts?
If nobody says anything, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
So it's been really hard for me not to talk about the entire criminal justice system and the potential flaws and pitfalls in it. But I think we touched around it. And this is my first time with this group, I think. The second time with just the social justice with SDARJ. However, are you going to continue the discussions throughout the entire criminal justice system? Their probation, parole has extreme power and authority over people. It's a barrier to people re-entering the system. The court systems, I mean, there's a lot to be done.
So I wouldn't mind addressing some of that.
Please.
First, I would like to just say thank you to SDARJ for hosting this fabulous panel tonight. All of that needs to be addressed. And what we collectively can do is, today is National Night Out, where the community does activities with the police. And Dr. Nolan can speak to when he was here in Wilmington, and we worked with WPD very closely, Wilmington Police Department, and we built trust in the communities. And how we built it was through community policing. The officers would literally walk my district with me when I was on city council, and just the desire to want to know the community. Dr. Nolan can talk to you about the fact that the officers would go to my children's basketball games, and I always refer to the children in my district as my children or my babies, actually all up and down the state. And they'd go to the basketball games, they go to the baseball games, they go to soccer matches, or whatever was happening in there, or they would go to the school when they were made the honor roll and be there to support them when they would get their certificate. And until we get back to that place, and I don't know why that doesn't exist to the degree that it did when I was on city council, but that's where we can really start making the changes. You know, it's about relationship building. And when the community and the police feel like they're one, and that may not happen. I know this may sound very utopian, but we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So it did take time to break down those barriers. I do have young people who won't shake the hands of officers because one of my young men, one of my children, he's about 15, he won't shake the hand of an officer. Even if an officer helps him off the ground, he won't shake his hand because police killed his uncle. Well, I'm working with him to get him to understand that not everybody is that person or those officers who killed your uncle. But you tell that to a 15-year-old. So those are the things that we have to work through as a community. And the police, we need their help in order to make these necessary changes. And that's where organizations like SDARJ and many others make the difference. And Dr. Wright asked the question about, there was a study in 2010, and he wanted to see a more recent study. And I believe there is one. But at the end of the day, with these studies, what changes? The numbers still pretty much stay the same. Black and brown people are incarcerated at alarming rates. And what's being done? And until you, the people, start electing people who sincerely care about you, the people, then we're going to keep going in circles. So really the power lies with all of you to choose people to represent you who have your best interests at heart. So Eric and I are wholeheartedly supporting Nina Turner to become Congresswoman in Cleveland in the 11th district, because we need people to represent us, not special interests. And that's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Find people who sincerely love you and will do what's right by you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Owens, were you going to add something, sir?
I think, coming out to Sherry is always hard. But I definitely just want to say, she hit the nail right on the head. You have to stay engaged. You have to keep working. Everyone has a role to play in this movement that's going on. And like I said earlier, this isn't going to change overnight. This is going to be a long-term fight that we're going to need people who are willing to raise their voice, people who are willing to understand the policy and sit down and discuss that with legislators and with key stakeholders. We're going to need people who are educating the general community about what is going on, what is Leaboard, what is policing in the community looking like, what is reimagining policing in our community, what does that look like? And then also, if we're not seeing those results that we want as a community as a whole, we have to change the people who are in power, whether it's the General Assembly, local councils, whatsoever. It starts at the very top and has to work its way down. And I think that is so important to remember. If you look at some of the talking points, 4 or 5 years ago, or 7 years when I first got into the policing fight, Black Lives Matter was looked at negatively. Now people are starting to understand what Black Lives Matter truly stands for. It's not a we hate the police. It's time to actually look at the Black community and look at how they're disproportionately being attacked by a system that has always been built against them. And that's why it's so important for us all to stay involved. So again, thank you for having me on here with such amazing panelists. And I look forward to continuing to work with everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Nix, were you going to say anything? Or did you have something else to add before we close up?
Not
Okay.
much. I just want to say thank you for having me on. I agree with a lot of Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker's comments. We got to get officers more involved in the communities. I think that is like one of the bridges to the gap of the mistrust, and also to, I don't know, I just see a world, or a world where police are so heavily prevalent in these communities that they feel a lot of violence is going on, but when they're there, they're not there on a militant kind of trying to enforce their power type of mindset. They're more there to like really get in the faces of the youth and talk to them, about their futures, about their plans, about their goals, being role models. I know that a lot of kids growing up, before they ever get to see the world and see what's going on with police and see the negative stuff, they look up to them. So if they can get into the faces of not just the elementary school kids, but also the teenagers too, go to the rec center. We need those rec centers back too, but go to the rec centers that are still up and running. Look at those basketball games and things of that nature. It'll make a world of difference. It really would.
It absolutely would. Yes. And I would just add the major power of voting and getting rid of those legislators who don't have the community's best interest at heart. And that's a whole nother level. All right, so Jim, anything else?
I want to say, this panel has been so great. I mean, I appreciate all the things that we heard tonight. And I look forward to working more with you in the future on these types of things. One thing I can imagine is if the police could see the benefit of mobilizing and getting behind the energy that's in this Zoom room, we'd be able to make changes pretty quickly. And so anyway, I appreciate all of your efforts and all of your great remarks. And Kobe, you did a great job following Representative Dorsey Walker also.
Yes, you did. And I would just add, I would just add also is the police, if they could understand too, that the reimagining would also benefit them, not just folks in the community. I mean, it just would benefit everyone. So it's a holistic approach. And with that, I say thank you to everyone for being here. Claire?
Yes, thank you, Gail. And I would echo that. I want to especially thank our panelists because, you've given your time tonight. You could have been doing something else, on a Tuesday evening from 7 to 8:30, and you willingly chose to be here. And what you've given us is very special. We appreciate that. I want to thank all the participants who also have chosen to give their time tonight, and especially on a night where I understand there are a number of conflicts. So the fact that you came to us is a privilege. We are planning on having 2 more special forums. We do not have the date yet for the next one, but we will be publicizing it in the near future. We'll be sending out, a save the date on our Facebook page and to our membership. And we look forward to seeing everybody again, to keep the discussion up on how to reimagine policing to create strong and safe communities. I also want to thank Calvin for being on hand to guide us through this and for giving us a few extra minutes tonight, because things were going so well that even though this was supposed to end at 8:30, we needed to keep going. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Be well.